Well, that round of footy can get in the bin. Is that how you felt? Guys like Cleary, Trainer, Reid, all drastically underperformed as cash cows, let alone I know some coaches really got stung by some underperforming captaincy scores. But no matter what, we head forward into another round. And here at the coaches panel, I'm going to give you my top 10 trade targets for AFL Fantasy as we head into another weekend of fantasy football. It's MJ from the coaches panel. I do hope you're well. And as always, 1 to 10, I'll give you my top 10 trade targets. Let's go with the number one option I think this week you should be considering to trade into. It's got to be Tristan Petracca. He's as cheap as I think he's going to get now. He was already cheaper last week, gone up a little bit more, but he's under that $900,000 price point. And you look at that fixture over these next 2 weeks, it's as good as it's going to get. And it all starts this weekend. You've got that great matchup early against Richmond. Yes, I know they were awesome against Gold Coast Suns, but I genuinely believe this Richmond side, and we've seen it now a couple of times, that they can play a half a game of footy and then struggle to back it up the very next week. And then they can play a quarter of footy and then struggle to back it up. And then last week they played 3 really great quarters of football. I'm actually expecting a little bit of diminishing returns for them, and the fact that Melbourne seemed to have found their mojo a little bit last week against Fremantle. You put those things combined, and I think it's a ripping fortnight of matchups, and it starts this Thursday night. He's not VC worthy. I think there might be some other ones you could put that on, but if you're trading into anyone, he's as close to a top 6 forward as I think we're going to get. It does seem to be pretty clear to me who the best 5 are. You've got McRae, he's in the mix. You've got Smith, he's in the mix. You've got Daniel, he's in the mix. You've got Rankin, he's in the mix. And I think Nic Martin deserves to be in that. That's not in any order, by the way. And Petracca to me is as good and as close to, say, a Jason Horne-Francis territory, but has probably a more favourable fixture and a better buy balance. So for me, I'm happy to put Track as my number one trade target this week. I think we're set for a 105 plus run over the next couple of weeks and an under 900,000 and forward eligible. I don't think you can go wrong with Tristan Petracca. My number 2 trade target, going to be available in that same game. If I was trading into any midfielder right now, the one I would want to get my hands on is a Tim Taranto. A break even of just 76 is well short of what his seasonal average is, but it's actually what I've been seeing him do over these last 2 weeks. And yes, it's highlighted with that 120 plus score last week against the Gold Coast Suns, but he's starting to spread a little bit better, which means we're starting to see those uncontested marks pick up. We know tackles is always going to be such a part of his game, let alone the contested footy. And the beauty in AFL Fantasy is, although he at times can be not the most clean user of the ball, which isn't uncommon for the style and the type of player that he is, we just don't get burned by that. So at 925K, with, again, a good matchup this week against Melbourne, and he's got history on his side that shows he can push that 110 territory. I don't think he's going to be that, but at the price point you're getting him, to be able to get a run of 105 from now to the mid-season buy, I think is a fantastic outcome, and more than likely, given that I feel like they've found that balance of how to get this midfield firing. It's still not perfect beyond any means. It's still missing some dynamic movement, still missing some speed and some polish, but Richmond will get there. But politely, we don't need to worry about that just yet. Tim Taranto, to me, if I was trading into any midfielder this week, he's the one I feel offers both scoring capacity and value, 2 important things that we need to be hunting at this time of year. My number 3, probably the best downgrade target of the week as far as I'm concerned. But the challenge that he has alongside pretty much anybody that's sort of under that $300,000 range that we're looking at the moment is some job security. But my number 3 trade target this week would be a James Tunstill. Mid forward, I thought he was pretty good this week just gone against Collingwood. Offers something offensively and defensively, and importantly, did it without really getting any concern that he'd cop a little bit of est. Brisbane were underwhelming. That wasn't his fault. There was a bunch of other variables in there underperforming match last week against the Pies. I do like him as a downgrade option. I know a lot of people are trying to find ways to get into Petracca, to get into Taranto, to get into seeing other players that I'm going to list throughout here because it either fits their structure or they'd prefer that player over another, which is fine. But to me, if I was downgrading to anybody under 300,000, my ideal target would be Tunstall. But he, like all of these players in this range, have massive vest and job security concerns. So putting that there, here, no circumstance should be on your field. That's way too skinny a bench option if that's where you're headed. But to alleviate some cash, if named, I'm pretty happy to put Tunstall as my number one downgrade target of the week. My number 4 trade target was a guy we put in the top 10 last week, and he did deliver with a 120 plus score. He's really backed up. Nic Martin, under $1 million, but this is probably going to be the last week we see him in there. Back-to-back tons. And what I loved about this game is when you watch it on the eye, you would have sworn that he spent the majority of his game in defense because he was taking kick-ins. He was being the first kick outlet that they'd bring the ball into kick-in, or they just wanted to get the ball in his hands. So much ball movement funneled through him, and there's a reason for it. Just cast your mind back beyond the past fortnight. How often did you watch Essendon kind of get out of defensive 50 and they were just turning it over? Go back to that round 2 game against the Crows is a great illustration. They actually won plenty of the ball in their defensive 50, but they just butcher it and turn it over at centre wing, and all of a sudden it just comes back with interest. Well, Shields no longer there. Roberts they're not utilising as much, and Reid and Pryor, while fine users of the ball, they're not at Nic Martin's capacity to be able to exquisitely get them inside attacking areas and out of dangerous situations. So I see why they've made that coaching structural move. He's still spending a lot of game time on the wing and a lot of time half forward, but he's pushing back to become the outlet to get them out of trouble inside that sort of defensive territory area, and letting him be the playmaker. So I feel like they've figured a way to have their cake and eat it too, because they do need that ball use forward of 50, but they also need to get out of their defensive 50. It's not cheap by any means, and last week was prime time to get him. Others prioritise Dacos over him, which I don't think is a bad trade at all. People prioritise Petracca over him. I don't think that's a bad trade at all either. But he's right in the mix. And that defensive forward eligibility just gives you some flexibility with your trade cadence too. Maybe you went 3 defender rooks on field this week and got a little bit burnt by it. Well, if you're a Nic Martin owner, you can flip that back and all of a sudden a trainer can go down to a Tunstall, and now a Petracca type or a Taranto type are available to you. So I think as long as he's sitting in this role, which is a wingman that's got the license to drift back and set up the play, but still getting forward to impact the scoreboard, I actually think this is the perfect role for Nic Martin. If he does that, then he's going to be a top line defender and a top line forward for us in 2025. And then to round out my top 5 trade targets is a Tristan Xerri. Dropped over 200,000, I think, to date. And probably you could say has a little bit more to go, but a break even of 115, under $1 million now, 961,000. If you're a little bit anxious about what the last couple of weeks of Tom de Koning has been, now the matchups haven't been favourable to him, but if you want to get off of a TDK and get into something that feels a little bit more certain and safe, then absolutely you could make that move of a TDK into Xerri. Now, I don't think it's a high volume priority because you're not really banking any cash on that trade. You're really just banking on the divergence now of TDK continuing to slow and Xerri to get back to what he had shown not only in the first couple of games of the year, but ultimately what he was for us in 2024. So I think that trade is going to be very appealing for some that don't really get a chance to get into any upgrade options or don't really love any downgrade options. And I see why, because as I mentioned, Tunstall has got no job security as far as I'm concerned. I'd be shocked if he's dropped. Absolutely. But he's got no, for 5 weeks straight, he's going to be playing in the team level of confidence. So I think Xerri is someone that's going to appeal to a certain type of coach. And I don't hate it as a trade. I think it's a viable trade. It's why I've got him inside my top 5. And that is who really are my priority trade moves. So yes, can you do a TDK into a Xerri? You can. If you went Xerri into Briggs last week, oh my gosh, that hurts for you. But lesson learned. And that's what fantasy football is all about, our lessons to take into future trades and future seasons. So they're my top 5. Petracca, Taranto, Tunstall, Martin, and Xerri. Would you like to know my final 5 of the top 10? All right, let's go. Number 6, it's a Matty Carroll. Defender, look, floating at a decent price range for us at the moment at just over 300,000. I think he's going to appeal to some coaches that don't have a lot of flexibility in their squad and are looking for a way to kind of get a 200K outlet out of a trainer, for example, and all of a sudden turn that 200K into another player that they might be able to, whether it be one of my top 2 trade-in options or not. I think that's an appealing move for a lot of coaches. I think his job security is solid. I wouldn't say it's shaky, but I wouldn't say it's certain either. The fact, though, is he's played 2 games. Carlton have won those 2 games. Yes, they haven't been against great opponents for sure, but the reality is winning form is winning form. And I think they need to continue to reward the players that are getting it done for them, because they have done well. They have beaten the teams to the level they should, not just scraped over the line. So let's give Carlton some credit for that. And I think for that reason, Carroll's going to stay in and around the team for at least the next fortnight or so, which might just be enough to push him upwards towards that sort of 360, 370, and if things go well, maybe 400,000 over the next 2 to 3 weeks. That just might be enough to then again access that 150,000 down on a downgrade in a couple of weeks. I don't love it, but I don't hate it. It's the best defender downgrade I think that's going around for us this week. Then let's get funky for you for the next 4. One, I reckon you could almost predict that I'm going to mention his name. No, it is not Nathan O'Driscoll, but the others maybe will look a little different for you. My number 7 upgrade target for the week is Trent Rivers. We spoke at the top of this podcast about just how good the fixture is for Melbourne for this next 2 weeks. And as a result for Trent Rivers, it's just as favourable. Season high score last week with a 120 plus against the Dockers, in at that 756,000 price point. The break even is matching his average, but his last 2 weeks have been really, really solid. And what I like about Rivers as an appeal for coaches here is just cast your mind back 24, 48, 72 hours. Did you get stuck with a trainer on field? And that's just bad luck, right? Nobody forecast this up. That's bad luck. Did you get stuck with a read on field? Okay, that's not great, but it's not uncommon for key defenders to give us 30s and 40s. Even a Pryor was solid without being amazing, certainly better than those other 2. If you're rocking a number of rooks in your defensive line and your forward and mids feel relatively comfortable, and you're like, well, yeah, I could get Petracca, but it means I've got to bench a Davidson type and still run 3 defender rooks for another week. No, it can't get any worse than what it did for you this week. No, I know that feels like a jinx, but you can't get worse than a sub 2 and a 30 odd. It's just impossible to do. Watch for the heat to come in the comments. I see you already. But if you are worried about how defensive rook heavy you are, Rivers sits in the pocket where he's shown he's got a better ceiling this year than Petracca, and he's got a better price point, and he's got equally as good a fixture. Yep, he's got some volatility and role, but I do think that they've got a bit more stability in their side over the last couple of weeks, and that ball movement did look better. So to me, if you want to get out of a defensive rook on field and you want to tap into a team that's got probably the best 2 weeks of fixtures, Trent Rivers is a play. It's got risk associated, no doubt, but it's absolutely there. My number 8 trade target this week, Jai Newcombe. Again, not a cheap option I'm giving to you, but from now to the bye, it's a ripping run for inside mids for the Hawks. And he has shown, not just over the last 2 weeks, but over the last couple of years, his AFL Fantasy scoring with Will Day, as opposed to without Will Day, is massive. he thrives in these moments of opportunity, and even more so now with some change in that midfield again with Connor Nash getting reported, and I just don't see a world where he's not out for at least 3 weeks as a byproduct. Jai Newcombe to me is if you're spending up near $1 million again, you're starting to get hard because Green's close, Dawson's close, Brayshaw's close, Dacos is close. There's some ripping premium options in around that range. But you want to go unique and you want to get a guy with a great fixture. This could be a play to absolutely lock in. Not my number one mid trade in target. I think Taranto's better because he's 100,000 cheaper, and I think he could go at a similar 105 run over the next sort of 6 to 8 weeks. But pick your poison. I don't mind Newcombe as an option. Number 9. Going to stay in defense for you. Yeah, I'm trying to help you with a couple of ways to get rid of those defender rookies if you want to. Tom Stewart, 774,000, lowly owned, an average in the high 60s, which is just wild. He keeps finding ways to frustrate coaches that do own him. But the positive for non-owners is he keeps getting more and more enticing and appealing, because he has shown on multiple occasions this year, frustrating with laid outs and injuries, but also shown capacity to score. Those 100 marker is right within his scope. Hawthorn's not a great matchup for him. And I do think Geelong is showing that they're a really good side yet again. Look, a break even still of triple digits means it's not an essential move this week. But if you are in limited funds and you want a name and you want a guy that can get it done with 120s, 130s, Stewart sits in the pocket for you. Yes, it's got some risk associated with it, because ask anybody that has a Geelong player in their team and you are worried that they will be late outed for sure. And Tom has clearly already had that once this year, and they don't need to get their stars firing in April. It's August and September that they want their best players at their peak. So yeah, it's got risk associated to it, but the risk is minimized with the fact of what you are paying for him. So I do like Tom Stewart as an option. And then my last trade-in option that I'm going to give you of my top 10, let's go unique for you a little bit. Karl Amon is that $900,000 price range. Nice score last week. And what I love about Karl is how much that ball funnels through him, especially when James Sicily doesn't have a monopoly of the ball movement. He's got a little bit more of a penetrating kick. Offers something when they're trying to get some speed on the game. He's a different type of kick to Sicily. Both are really good users of the ball, but there's a lower penetration about the way Amon uses the ball over a Sicily. I think there's something that dynamically just sits in the way he gets that ball out of defensive 50 or brings the ball through the wings just to help that team and that ball movement forward of the ball. I really like Amon as a play. I think he's got some ceiling about him. His basement doesn't feel too bad. It is a little unique, but it sits in that range of option. Honestly, I probably would have put Sicily ahead of him had I a little bit more confidence that James isn't just going to get flipped forward at any given moment in a game. Yes, I know players like Karl Shadir are coming back soon, but I just don't trust Sam Mitchell to not deploy Sicily at any given moment in a game forward of the ball. And as a result, his scoring really fluctuates from good to poor. And Amon doesn't have that roller coaster. So to me, Karl Amon, I'm happy to put him ahead of Sicily. He's not as cheap as Sicily, but I think he's got a little bit more consistency of scoring, and I'm happy to pay that. Again, look at the fixture that Hawthorn have over the next couple of weeks. It's awesome for the type of player that he is. And I think we could get a guy that goes on a run of 105 over the next couple of weeks. And at that price range of 900K, I think it's a nice pick. So those are my top 10 trade targets this week for AFL Fantasy. The video's a little bit late. You can thank the AFL for adding a Monday afternoon game of footy for that. But I'd love to know, what are the trades you're making this week in AFL Fantasy? Why don't you comment below and let me know the trades you are making? If I happen to mention one of the players you're trading into, why don't you give this video a like? And of course, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you do so. It's a small task for you, but a huge impact for us. Inside the description of this episode is where you can get in touch with us across social media, get your hands on some Coaches Panel merch. You'll look good. You're a 5% better AFL fantasy coach when you own some AFL fantasy merch of the Coaches Panel. And of course, you can become part of our Patreon. They get a round review if you're a premium tier supporter, or if you're a supporter at any of the tiers, you also get a Q&A episode where you get to ask a question. I'll answer it. It's the only place we do Q&As during a season. So if you've ever wanted to ask us a question and get it heard on a podcast and answered, jump in, support us, become part of the Patreon. You get access to those things and a ton of other stuff, depending on the tier you jump into. Hey, thanks for tuning in. Good luck with your AFL fantasy trades this week. We can't wait to be back helping you again in your AFL fantasy side real soon.